Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad Podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets to help you on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to I Am Dad Podcast. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell. Thank you for joining us another Sunday morning for a new episode of I Am Dad Podcast. Hope you had a great week, and I hope all is well with you and your families. And so, as we always do, I just want to thank you for all of the support that we get from you each and every week, for all of you that's been listening to me really talk to you about the importance of subscribing and following the podcast, because it opens up our algorithms. It allows us to be seen and heard by more people, and it impacts our rankings, right? And so I keep telling you guys that some weeks ago, I got an email from FeedSpot, which is one of the platforms that monitor the engagement of blogs and particularly podcasts around the world, about 2 million of them to be exact. And I got an email about a month now ago where they sent me the category of dads. And so they monitor about 1,800 fatherhood-related, dad-related podcasts around the world. And I Am Dad Podcast ranks at number 7. And so I am really, really excited about that and really trying to stay up with that game, because 7's not good enough for me. I want to be at 5. I want to be at 3. I want to be at 2, and I want to be at 1. The cool thing about this particular platform is that it doesn't just rank the podcast by subscribers and followers, right? And so it looks at several different categories. It looks at quality, it looks at consistency, it looks at content, it looks at engagement, it looks at, and I always forget the other it does look at followers and subscribers, but it's looking at a more fuller level of content out of the podcast. And I think that's why we've probably risen so high, because of the quality of guests that we have and the information that we're getting out and engagement as a result of that. But I'm still not satisfied at number 7. We need to get to number 1. Now that I've got that out the way, I get to what I love to do most, which is talk to people who are in the same space that I'm doing incredible things, elevating this conversation of responsible fatherhood, marriage, relationships, parenting, you name it, and anything associated with that. This gentleman and our guest today had me on his podcast some time ago, and I tell you, I had such a great time talking to him. I love his spirit. I love what it is he's trying to accomplish, and I'm sure that you're going to enjoy him today. And he's also an author, just like myself. He is Mr. Tommy Maloney. He is the executive producer and the host of the podcast Blending the Family, where you can find his podcast on Apple, Iheart, Spotify, and Stitcher. He has spoken on TEDx. He is also a keynote speaker all over the place. He's been at every dad convention. He has won all kinds of speaking awards, including his involvement with Toastmasters International. I tried to do that. You and I got to talk about that. I tried that some years ago, stepped out. I probably need to step back in. But he is also an author of 25 Tips for Divorced Dads. Why not you? Why not me? And my dad's advice at 5:04 a.m., which I'm so curious about the 5:04 a.m. I'm sure we're going to talk about that today. He's written for magazines. He contributed to writers, to other books as a writer, The Expert's Guide to Teenagers and Father-Daughter Conversation. He enjoys a glass of red blend wine, right, which is always good, or hiding from the family. He is the dad to Betsy, Becca, Connor, and dogs, Duke, R.I.P., rest in peace, and Otis. I have one of those myself, and he's a husband to Ann, where he lives in the great state of Colorado. How you doing, Tommy?
Kenneth, I am super stoked, as always, to get to talk to other dads. And like you said, I had such a great time with you on my podcast. I am super excited that the tables get to turn and I get to just step back and just relax.
Right.
And just occasionally go,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about this. And I like to turn the tables on people. I think just about every person who's interviewed me on my podcast, I've had them or planned to have them on mine. And it's always a cool thing to kind of reverse those roles. And I get exactly what you're saying. It's so cool to kind of just sit back and just respond to questions and don't have to think and produce and move your hands and, turn your mic down to cough and sneeze and, almost choke because you want a glass of water, but you don't want that on the camera. All that stuff, guys, that we do trying to put together these podcasts. Listen, this is how we start all of our podcasts. And we start our podcast by asking the question, it's a question, it's something I want you to do. And that is, tell us your daddy story. You could tell us from the vantage point of your relationship with your dad, or you can tell it as a result of you being a dad, or what most people do is they do both.
I'm gonna take it from the point of, my space, blending the family, blended families. And so when my wife and I, Ann, first got together, we made it a rule that the kids would always come first. And so the first thing we did, Kenneth, was we dated for a while, probably 2, maybe 3 months before we even introduced the kids. So my wife has 2 daughters. I have a son. So my wife has the oldest, which is Betsy, and then Becca, and then my son, Connor. And so we wanted to make sure that, again, the kids came first and that we didn't stress them out. And so what we did is, when we finally decided to get all the kids together, was to find a neutral location. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is, Kenneth, that we didn't want to go sit at a restaurant, and force the kids to have conversation, because that would not be organic. That would, again, be too much pressure and stress. So it was wintertime, we went to an outdoor ice rink, and we just had fun. We just let the kids be kids, let them skate. And if worst case scenario, the kids didn't get along, Kenneth, and some people think this is my wife and I, well, she's now my wife, but 11 years later, she and I had this pact that if the kids didn't get along, we weren't going to continue dating, because, again, we wanted the kids first. And no matter how you want to call your higher power, spirit, God, source, big dude, little big lady, whatever you want to call it, they were looking down on us, and the kids got along great. And so, like I said, 11 years later, we're still happily married. The kids, Betsy's off and married. Becca is headed to nursing school. And at the time of this recording, I just had breakfast with my son yesterday, because he's headed to outside Detroit, to go to school. So as a blended family, Kenneth, I mean, I can't stress that enough, that the kids have to come first. So that's my dad's story for you.
Yeah, I'm glad we're walking down this trail, because I hadn't even thought about the whole conversation around blending families, which now I'm gonna have to bring you back again so we can talk specifically about that. But I want to spend some time on it, because I know people struggle in that process that you just discussed. That is the origin, or not the origin, but the beginnings of the things that you have to set forth before you can even move forward. And those things that somewhat, as you describe it, for me, in my relationship with my current wife, for us, they were deal breakers, right? So when you say all the kids had to get along, that's what you describe as a deal breaker. That is, if this doesn't work, we don't work. But it was interesting how you described that, because one of the things that Tracy and I talked about when we first started dating and coming and getting more serious with each other, because I had already had a daughter. She had already had a daughter. And then we had parents of those children who were also in the space, right? And we went a step further than you went, which is, if any of those relationships didn't work, we didn't work. And so it wasn't just the relationships of the siblings getting along, but it was the relationship between me and her daughter. It was the relationship between her and my daughter. It was the relationship between her and the mother of my daughter, and me and the father of her daughter. If any of those relationships didn't work, we could not work, because those are the things that literally tear relationships apart. When you think about that time, did you ever feel like that particular thing, those things that you set as somewhat deal breakers, do you think that those were things that you would call sacrifices?
I don't want to call them sacrifices because, as a parent, you want to do what's right for your kids, as best for your kids. And, to bring it, with my dad, my parents divorced when I was 5, and my son and his mom, we divorced around when he was 5. And one of the things that I had to finally have a conversation with my dad about was, he always felt that he was a bad dad because of the mistakes he made. And I tell him that we made those mistakes because we thought we were doing the right thing. I had to take that out of my head too, Kenneth. I had to stop saying that I was a bad dad, because again, I did things that I thought were beneficial for my son. So one quick example was, in 2008, I officially became divorced. And that first Christmas, I was a wreck. I mean, depression, the whole gamut. And so I had to go to a safe place. And I went and spent time in South Carolina with my mom and bonus dad. And when I say bonus dad, I have to always explain that in our household, we don't say step, because there's that connotation, step being so negative, and we wanted to create a positive environment in our household, so we always use the word bonus. Again, I went and spent time with them because I really was not in the right space. I am very blessed to have a former wife that is a really good mother. Her and I, we even to this day, we don't get along, and that's fine. Not everybody's going to get along. My wife and my former spouse, they're very cordial. So back in the day when my son was playing club hockey, they would talk, and they built a little bit of a relationship. And so to your point, Kenneth, I can see the benefits. I really do. That the whole parenting, all the parents need to be supportive. But I'm in that school where not every parent is going to get along with their former spouse's spouse, so to speak.
And I think a lot of people too don't take into account that one of the elements that you really have to have when you're trying to formulate a successful blended family is maturity, right? How much maturity do you think an individual has to have in order to successfully do that?
I think it's really key. Going back to your point about all the parents involved, that's the one thing that traditional parents really don't see. They don't see, the stresses. I'm dealing with my former spouse. My wife is dealing with her former spouse. And when it comes to maturity, I kid, because it's still taking me a long time to mature, and especially after a divorce. My wife, oh my gosh, I watched her grow after her divorce. I watched her mature. I watched her be the person that she has always wanted to be, but unfortunately she was in a bad marriage. When I say maturity, she was able to have in-person conversations with her former spouse. I even to this day, I can't have those conversations. So maybe I'm still working on my maturity, Kenneth, but as a partner to my wife, it was so rewarding getting to see her, elevate her maturity. So I agree. It's a different world when it comes to being in a blended family. It really is.
Yeah, I want to lean a little bit into your book, 25 Tips for Divorced Dads. Why not you? Why not me? And I think that a lot of people kind of never believe it's going to happen to them. And then one day it happens to them. Like when it happened to you, what was the strength that you had to pull on in order to at least get you to maintain your level of sanity as you went through it?
A lot of crying. I will admit it. When my former spouse and I were towards the tail end of our marriage, we were seeing a marriage counselor who I thought was a brilliant lady. And so after the divorce, and probably during the divorce, I kept going back to that counselor because I didn't want to go rehash what I was already going through with a different counselor. And so like I was saying, I had to leave to go spend time with my mom because I was a mess, and it took me many years to finally get through it. And I always remember a quote from the great Zig Ziglar, where he talked about, if you're feeling down, try and set a time limit of being down. Well, I really wish I had taken that advice to heart, because like I said, Kenneth, it took me a long time to really not just process it, but just try to alleviate as much anger that I was going through towards my former spouse. And so again, finding such a great partner with my wife, Ann, really helped me. And she has like a really cool sixth sense, and she can feel or tell when I'm feeling down. And I think that's probably one of the biggest keys, especially for men, to admit that they're down, that they're okay to say to another man, hey, can we just talk? Can we just, talk and have somebody listen? Because we get to the point where that we feel that if we go to therapy, or we're saying to another male that I'm feeling down, that's a weakness, but it's not. It's such a strength. And so luckily for me, I've been in therapy since I was 14 due to depression and suicide. And so I felt very comfortable, being in counseling. Matter of fact, when my wife, Ann, and I, before we got married, we went to marriage counseling to make sure that we were not rinse and repeating the same marriage we just got out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that you said, and I'm so glad you said, I want you to kind of talk a little bit about this, because I think it's another important aspect of, breaking up and divorce, and that is seeking good counsel, right? And so you talked about, going to your mom and your bonus dad, and then also getting counseling. Too often, we allow ourselves to seek counsel from people who just tell us what we want to hear to make us feel good, right? And that's not always the best thing for us. But what was it in you that made you think about the counsel you were seeking and not listening to people who were just trying to make you feel good?
I don't know who said it. Somebody said that if if you start talking about, how crazy your life is to other people that all are already crazy, it's not going to get you anywhere. And so I think it was a little bit, to use your word during our conversation, a little bit of maturity to realize, sure, I can go to my friends, but chances are they're probably just going to say, it's a good thing you're divorced. She's crazy, blah, 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 blah. But it's not seeking my purpose of trying to get through it. And, for me, I've been comfortable with professional counseling. There are times where you want to sit with the guys and, like you're talking in the intro, I like my red wine, but, still just sitting with the guys and just talking. A few years ago, I was in Toronto for work, and I was taking an Uber driver, and he was telling me, for the hotel he was taking me to, he goes, "Oh, I'm familiar with that hotel." I said, "Oh, tell me more." And he goes, "Once a quarter, he and his friends, his male friends, check in, and they just have a guy's powwow, so to speak. And they just sit and they talk about their feelings." And I said, hold on. This guy was in his probably late 20s. And I said, let me get this straight. You and your friends check into a hotel, and they purposely leave their cell phones at home, and they talk about their feelings. He goes, "Yeah, it's great." And I'm like, that's amazing. I mean, it is truly amazing that he has those friends, that has that safe space. But again, sometimes your friends might not be the best when it comes to counseling. So that's why I'm a big proponent of, even if you go to counseling, make sure it's a good fit too. Because the first counselor my former wife and I went to, it was not a good fit. So you can fire counselors as well.
Absolutely. Was writing the book therapeutic for you?
It was interesting. It was very interesting. I'm sorry, this book? That book?
The 25 tips for divorced dads.
Oh, that first book. Yeah, that was a lot of fun because at the time, I travel a lot for the dreaded day job. And when I wrote that first book, 25 Tips for Divorced Dads, it was on the tail end of just going through the divorce. And at the time, I was traveling from Denver to LaGuardia Airport every Sunday. And I would just write things down. How can I stay connected with my son, Connor? How do I stay in his life when I'm not physically there? And so some of the things like write postcards. This is back in the day before laptops had the cameras already built in. So one of the things I recommended was get a camera so you can still see your kids on a daily basis or a weekly basis. Stay connected with their teachers. Those were just some of the things that I was doing, but I wanted other dads to understand that even though you're not in that household anymore, you still need to stay connected. And that's where the 25 Tips for Divorced Dads came in.
Okay. So let's fast forward to the second, which I think is the second book, right? Your newest book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. You gotta tell me about this title and where this title came from.
No. Just kidding.
Listen, I've had people say no. I'm like, all right, next question.
I could be a real jerk, and I don't want to be, because I love you, Kenneth. I love, everything I see on LinkedIn with what you're doing. I could just say, no, buy the book and find out. No, I'm not going to be that way. So my dad's advice at 5:04 a.m. represents at 5:04 a.m. When my son was born. So as you know, when your kids are born, you got to start calling the family and let them know, hey, congratulations, blah, blah, blah. So when Connor was born, I first called my former mother-in-law, let her know, then called my mom. My former wife, her father was tragically killed when she was very young. So that's why I only had to call her mom. And then when I called my dad, a little bit of backstory. My dad has a very, very dry sense of humor. We joke, he lives in Chicago, and we joke along one of the longest stretches in downtown Chicago is Michigan Avenue. And we kid that he's the mayor of Michigan Avenue because you can't go 10 feet without my dad running into somebody he knows, because he worked in sales for many, many years and advertising. So my dad has a very unique sense of humor. And so when I called him, it's been a long night, Kenneth. You've been up, even though you're not the one that's delivered the baby or had the baby, you're a little bit tired. So I had not a lot of energy and not a lot of patience. And so I said to my dad, I go, hey, congratulations. We have a boy, his name is Connor, and you're a grandfather. And he's like, well, let me ask you a question. Do you know what your responsibility and role right now as a dad? And I'm just like thinking, Kenneth, I just want to go to bed. That's all I want to do, And I said, Dad, I'm guessing, just to love him as best I can. And there's this dramatic pause, and he goes, no, screw him up as best you can, just like I did with you. And I'm like, okay, love you. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. And so I took that information, that advice, but I reversed engineered it. And one of the things that I learned from my dad was he chaperoned a couple of field trips when I was a kid, especially when we were in downtown Chicago. So like I said, Kenneth, I took that advice, turned it around, and tried to make it a best fit that I could. And especially, after a divorce, you really have to start thinking about your place, your role as a dad, still raising your kids, again, when you're not in that household. So my dad's advice is to screw up your kids as best you can, but probably in a playful type way.
And I'm sure your dad has many other pieces of advice. But now that you're in the space and you're a blended family, you have your own son, you have all of these like life experiences, like when you are, and I'm sure you're like me in many ways in your own personal spaces. Everybody knows what you do. So anybody and everybody who wants some dad advice, it's like, oh, let's ask Tommy. He knows. He's like, those kinds of things happen. Like when you're talking to dads today, particularly young dads, what is it that you believe they're missing that we didn't miss?
Taking your time for granted. That was a life-changing for me. And I cannot stress that enough, because like I said, Kenneth, I thought I had the rest of my life with my former spouse, that, as much as we bickered, that we were going to stay together, and I didn't have to worry about, coming off the road and my son wanting to go do something and me being the jerk going, no, well, let's do it later. Well, later's gone. Time is currency that you don't get back. And so what I say to young dads is, don't take your time for granted, because you just never know. Not to get down a bad, ugly story, but with my son, when he was 15, playing hockey, one of his teammates died tragically. And that life lesson really not only reflected to what I say to other dads, but to our kids as well. And so don't take your time for granted, because again, you're not going to get that time back.
One of the things I, struggle with is, you mentioned this earlier about your dad always believing that he was a bad dad. And I think that many of us, particularly those of us who are in this space, who's talking about fatherhood and family all the time, we can almost make ourselves feel like we got to be perfect, right? And so spend an awful lot of time over analyzing every conversation I have with my child, every conversation I have with my wife, with the mothers of my children, how I function and act, in public and online. I'm always thinking about, you cannot make a misstep, because as soon as you make that misstep, people are not going to believe that you can actually do what you espouse to do. In your space and in your work, given, your conversations, given the podcast and given your life lessons and history, do you still, to a small degree, gauge yourself, with respect to how you believe how you're being seen as a father by your children?
That's a great question, because I used to have that thought in my mind, what is my legacy? Am I being the best version of myself to my kids? And it goes back to, trying to have people like you, and you can't control what other people do and think. An example is my relationship with the two girls is different, night and day from the two. And for a while I did struggle, because I always felt that I was giving 100% to, not just to the two girls, but, to my son. And I finally came to a point where I'm not gonna win one of them over, and that relationship is going to be what it is. And so I don't. It's not that I don't care what people think of me. You and I are very similar, because we're authors, speakers, podcasters. I was, again, to use Zig Ziglar, he talked about, when he gives a motivational speech, he's not there to motivate you. That's onto you. That's your responsibility if you're going to take that advice or not. And so along those lines, Kenneth, when I finally realized that I'm not going to have the same relationship with one daughter versus the other, that it goes back to me. And it is something that I treasure, is my relationship with the two girls. But I understand that it's not going to be what I want it to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my biggest fears, and it's interesting that we're having this conversation, because I literally just had this exchange of dialogue with my 14-year-old son this morning. And I just, I went into this whole thing about how, I'm really trying to tell you some things that you don't know. I'm trying to steer you in the right direction so that you can take advantage of opportunities in life. And I'm really, to a certain extent, sacrificing a lot of myself and a lot of, what I'm trying to do for the family, for you, so that you don't have it so hard, when you get older. And then I kind of shifted into the space where I start saying, because I know what this looks like. I know what this is going to look. And one of my biggest fears, Tom, is the speech. And here's what I mean by the speech. This is with all my kids. 10, 15, 20 years down the line, they're going to be asked to come speak somewhere, whether it's at the church function, in their own profession, connected to their profession, whatever it is. And they're going to have this moment where they're going to talk about their father, right? And I cringe what that narrative is going to be. And a lot of where I cringe about that narrative is to your point where you say, I have just said to myself, I'm going to let this relationship be what what it's going to be. But their perspective of that is you gave up on me. And that's what my conversation was with him this morning, that 20 years down the line, when I stop doing all I'm doing because of your non-response, 10 years from now, you're going to stand up in front of somebody and you're going to tell people about all the things you don't have because of what I did not do for you. And you're not going to remember the things I did for you. And that's a struggle for me. So as you're talking about that, and I'm thinking about the two girls, but I'm more thinking about Colin now, what's the most difficult conversation you've had with him about your relationship?
Wow. Most difficult. So before he started driving, he and I would have long, about an hour from our house to either back to his mom's house or from our house to a hockey game or a hockey practice where he was playing. So one day, and I wish I could remember where I heard this kind of, but somebody said, ask your kids, how are you doing, as a parent with them? And so he was probably around 15. And I said to him, I go, how am I doing as a dad? Am I supporting you as best I can? How do you feel that I'm doing as a dad? And he looked at me, hold on. So he looked at me and he just said, we're okay. And that's all I needed to hear. Mm-hmm. And we can't control our legacy, Kenneth. We can't control, what our kids are going to say. And it is hard, especially as a man, because, as a man, you're in the work world and, you come in every day and you're killing it and everybody sees what you're doing and you don't know what they're thinking. You don't know, what they say outside the office, and that's okay. And it's still okay, Kenneth. Whatever your relationship with your kids, like I said, yesterday, Connor and I were having breakfast and I just sat there. I just wanted to be in the moment. We didn't talk about life as much as I want to talk to him about, him again, going back to school. There are things that I just want to say to him, but you know what? I just wanted to listen. I just wanted to, see him. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard, during the summer because he works 2 jobs. He lives an hour away from us. I travel. So having those moments with our kids, it's special. Yeah. And again, we don't want to take that time for granted. And so whatever, down the road, Kenneth, any of your kids are on the platform, mm-hmm. They're on the stage, and whatever comes out of their mouth comes out of their mouth. Wow. And yeah, you want them to say, oh my gosh, my dad Kenneth was the best. He was the bomb.com. He had this podcast, and he was trying in his own world to change the world. Or they could just say, yeah, he was a good guy.
He was okay.
He was
He did
okay. He
Yeah,
did okay.
Wow. Let's talk about the podcast a little bit because, as you said, both of us are podcasters. I love this space. I love doing what this podcast does for me in my own heart. How is it fulfilling what it is you're trying to do in life? How is the podcast fulfilling that?
I'm laughing because at the time it's recording, back in January of this year, I went through a podcast cohort, and I really wanted to up my podcasting game, learning from other so-called experts. And if you're listening to this, the audio, yes, I'm doing the air quotes right now. Experts, gurus, whatever. And unfortunately, I listened to them, and I said, my podcast, because I feel that it's a wonderful space talking about, and I don't just talk about blended families. I talk about men's mental health. We've talked about what is a good wine on the first date. So things that I enjoy talking about. Well, going through this cohort, I was learning I had the wrong microphone. I was using the wrong software, this and that. And so I felt depleted. I felt that I can't do this. So I said, things have started to change. So one of the things that have changed is more people have started to reach out to me, wanting to talk to me. And I'm like, you know what? Let's bring the podcast back. So the podcast is coming back. I do miss it. I truly miss it, Kenneth. I miss having conversations just like you and I are having. Again, this is why I respect you so much as a podcaster, because we're very similar. We don't send questions out because we have this agenda and we have to talk about this point and this. Let's just have a conversation. Let's just, like, we're sitting here having coffee or an adult beverage. And so it does fulfill me. It does, like we were talking before we started rolling, it does put you on a high. After having, a wonderful conversation with somebody, and you get to have, learning opportunities with somebody else, and you start thinking, going, oh, they brought their A game. They brought something to share with the audience. And so I'm like I said, Kenneth, I miss doing the podcast. I've already recorded some new episodes. I had episodes ready to go that are going to be launched. The month of September in Australia, that's when they celebrate Father's Day. So I'm excited about, talking to somebody from Australia, and we're going to talk about Father's Day. We're going to talk about his life as a single dad. So it energizes me too, Kenneth. I miss it. And so I'm super excited about, let's say, Blending the Family podcast 2.0 is coming out, or so. Yeah.
That sounds good. I have, I just, the conversations, that, I get these, as much as I guess, people get information and heal from listening. I get the same level of things from the people, that I interview. And from this interview, I'll take away, don't worry so much about the speech. The speech is going to be what the speech is.
Yep.
They made, to your point, get up and shower me with all kinds of loving anecdotes and stories and things that will make people cry and laugh, or they'll just get up there and say, he was okay. I'm taking that away, from this. But I want to share with you like two things that I heard in the last few days in all of the podcasts that I've done that stuck with me as well, that I'm trying to process. And one of the things is think it was, can't remember which one said it since I talked to so many people, so I won't tie it to anybody. I'll just say what I heard. And he says we should spend more time looking through the mirror we should spend more time looking through the mirror and not through our lenses.
Mm.
And I was like, whoa. And we were like talking, he said it and he kept on going. I was like, wait, whoa.
Wait, yeah.
Yeah. We got to back up on that one. I was like, and I just wrote it down. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but that is something that, becomes part of the dialogue. And then I was talking to another good friend of mine who was talking about, their father who was struggling, that they just came back together on after 51 years. His father finally gave him the apology, that he's been looking for after coming to hear him perform in one of his shows, and sent him a long text afterwards. And he shared the text with me the other day. And I'm reading this text, and there's this line in the middle as he's apologizing to his son. But he puts this line in there, and then he goes on to keep talking about him. And the line was, trouble followed me because love didn't carry me.
Mm.
And he was kind of talking about what his son didn't know about his life.
Right.
And he was given some explanation as to why he was the way he was. And it was just such a touch. I was just like, and that's why I keep doing these things, because I keep getting these motivating, like little, just small nuggets of inspiration that says, keep doing this, because you and I, there is more people who listen to us and don't say anything than those who listen to us and follow, subscribe, engage, ask questions, email. And so you just never know whose life you're touching, and whose life you're saving at a critical moment, whether it is listening to the podcast live the first time it hits, or listening to it 3 months down the line just because they came across it. And there is this podcast that's called Blending the Family, and someone is having a tough time trying to figure out how to navigate that space. And so, yes, I encourage you, make sure you bring that thing back, and don't let it go, because somebody out there, as someone always says to me when it comes to being a servant, there is somebody out there who's waiting for you to show up.
I appreciate that, Kenneth. I really do. And those were two fantastic stories. And one of the things I just want to touch once again is, you as a dad, you're setting an example for a lot of us dads. And there are times where we're being watched by our kids, and because we try to be role models, even when we're not trying to be a role model. Prime example is my bonus dad, Dan. I learned so much from him, and I feel this is why our family became successful, is because I got to see a role model without him trying to be that role model. And one example was when he came into my life, he did not, lay down the law. He didn't come in, say, this is my way or the highway. He got to learn who I was. He got to know me. And so that was one of the biggest things that I took away when I was first dating my wife and, incorporating the girls, is that let me just learn from them. And so, at the time, the girls were in gymnastics. And I don't know if you've ever been to a gymnastics meet, Kenneth. It's an all-day event.
Yes.
All day. I'm going to say all day. All day. And so even though I wrote this piece a while back on the blog talking about being that invisible parent, because as a bonus parent, a lot of times you are that invisible parent. And it's a role that it's not easy to accept. But again, I go back to, my bonus dad, and that is he was a role model without him even realizing he was being a role model. Same thing with you, Kenneth. You are a role model to your kids. And regardless, again, whatever they say, they're going to say it. So, those two examples, again, even though the last one, that the dad wasn't really in that person's life, what kind of impact that text has made to him. So yeah, I'll just end it this way with, this international speaker told me once, don't be a secret. Let others know, like you're saying, about being in service, your servitude. And so
wow,
I have to remind myself every once in a while, stop being a secret.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm writing that one down too. My friend, tell everybody how they can get in touch with you, where they can find the podcast, and how they can purchase the books.
Everything, just go to blendingthefamily.com, Sure. The latest book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. is on Amazon, but you can also purchase it directly on the website. Podcast information is there, my speaking, writing, me.
Yes.
Blendingthefamily.com. I feel like I'm doing an infomercial. Blendingthefamily.com.
Right, as the young folks say, just Google me. You'll find. Just Google me.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks so much, and thank you to all of my I Am Dad podcast listeners. I appreciate you. And as always, continue to just, if you're looking at the screen, touch that subscribe button. If you're listening, hit that follow button. And you know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor used to say to me, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Until next Sunday, I love you, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad Podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting IamDadPodcast.com. That's IamDadPodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am Dad, period.